one, and I asked them, I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" They're like, "Hey, what's up?" I was like, "Are you guys going north or south?" And they said, "We're going south." I was like, "Have you guys happened to see anybody at Spruce Lake number three?" They're like, "No, but that's a great spot." And I was like, "Awesome." And I've heard good things about Spruce Lake number three, so I was really, really grinding to get to that spot.
Now, were you trying to get to that lean-to due to mileage or due to you heard that was the best lean-to of the bunch? What was the reason you wanted number three versus the other two?
I wanted number three because I heard it was just like one of the most beautiful spots.
Okay,
It's
cool.
right on the water, so I really would just wanted to check that out for myself. So like Spruce Lake lean-to number one isn't really on the water. It's kind of like surrounded by like pine, and it didn't even seem to face, actually it seemed to face like west. I'm sorry, east. It faced east. And I didn't really like the Spruce Lake lean-to number two either. Kind of seemed to face the opposite direction of where I was heading from. So I continued to just keep going, and I was like, yep. As soon as I saw Spruce Lake Lean-to, I was like, wow, this is beautiful. Like this is like the spot to stay. And there was like this canoe there, like an older one. I didn't even bother to check it out because I was like, I have no idea what condition this thing is in. But apparently, the word on the street is that the canoes are there for you to use. But me and not knowing anything about that, I'm just like, I'm gonna leave this here, and like, who knows? Like, you can go out in the middle of the lake and just like sink and
Yeah,
die. So
I
I'm not
would have
trying to do
avoided
that.
it too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you're not familiar, there it's looking at the map. There's 1 mile between Spruce Lake lean-to number one and number three, with two in the
Yep.
middle. So within that mile range, there's three different lean-tos.
Yep. Right. So it's kind of nice to like know like if there was somebody staying at the one I wanted to stay at, I could double back to the other one.
Absolutely.
And there's also a campsite right next to Spruce Lake number three, which is also on the water. And it's just, I mean, it's nice. It's its own private spot. It has its own little fireplace and stuff too. And there's plenty of trees that you can hang your bear bag in. And that's like one thing you also want to pay attention to is like, is there good trees to like set up your bear bag? Because that's very important. Like, I mean, so I chose to do a bear bag. To my knowledge, I believe that bear cans are actually now required at this point. It started 2020, and it's always been recommended, but I think they are actually requiring it now. Um, but anyways, I had a bear bag with me on my trip. So I got to Spruce Lake number three, and as soon as I got to the lean-to, I saw all this like garbage like everywhere, like wrappers, like beer cans that was like kind of like
Oh, it's
stomped on.
terrible.
Yeah. So I was like, this is it's like this is a beautiful spot, but is this gonna cause me another bear encounter later? Like, so some of these wrappers looked like they were fresh, like
Hmm.
within the last day or two or a couple of days. So I was like, I have no idea if people maybe stopped and had lunch and didn't put their stuff away, or if somebody left a granola bar behind and an animal destroyed it. I have no idea. But first thing I did was I put everything that I felt was like a nuisance or like around the area that I was supposed to be sleeping in my trash bags in my bear bag, and I hung that up away from me. But as I got situated, I was like, this is really nice, but I definitely had in the back of my mind that this was going to be an issue. And some clouds are rolling in. I was starting to get some more rain, and this was an absolute thunderstorm. And I took my tent footprint and I draped it over this like beam in the lean-to just to prevent any rain like from flying into the lean-to. Like that was just something I was concerned about, was getting wet overnight. And after the thunderstorm stopped, I realized that some animal was like coming into my lean-to, and it was just like scratching around, and it sounded decent size, like maybe a raccoon or whatever. And every time like I started getting scared, but then I like would move on my pad and it would run away and just like take off, and then like an hour later it would come back. So I kind of had pretty poor sleep.
Interesting. Now, what time would you say you made it to Spruce Lake number three? So that's the end of day three, which was the first big day, the 20 miler. Roughly around what time do you think you stopped? Because I know you started around six again.
I think I got there at like 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. Right on schedule then for what you're
Yep.
looking to do.
Yep. I still had plenty of daylight. I stretched out. I made dinner. I got in the water that time. I went right out, and there's a beach there. It's like a little like a little cobblestone beach, and you can walk out. Just be careful if you're going barefoot. You never know if there's glass. But I walked right out there, and it's just beautiful, and it's just surrounded by spruce trees, and the water was so clear too. And it was just so nice to be in the lean-to before the thunderstorm and like listen to like the water wash up over the rocks. And it was just like a beautiful spot. So it was a shame that people were leaving garbage and leaving it, like disrespecting it, you know?
So now let me ask you another question. So you maybe I missed what you said. So you said that an animal was coming into the lean-to while you were sleeping. So were you in your tent in the lean-to?
No, I was in the lean-to on my sleeping pad in my sleeping bag, but I took, if you like notice like on a lean-to, there's usually like this center beam.
Mm-hmm.
So I draped my footprint over top of the
Sure.
beam and try to use that as like a kind of just like an extra shelter, like a division between me and like whatever weather was coming in, because the weather was coming in from the west, so it was just going to blow right into me, and it
Mm-hmm.
was blowing the footprint around like crazy. So I was worried
Okay.
about that.
So basically, the animal never went to the side of that. They were just in the front of that, uh, that you could hear.
It sounded like it came like right up to where my face was because I had my
Oh,
pack over
geez.
close to my face. Yeah. And I didn't have anything in my pack. So I was kind of wondering like did I like maybe sprinkle like because I had like Propel packets. I was wondering if maybe like there was some sweet residue or anything like that around everything. I packed my toothpaste, my wet wipes, Propel packets, like everything in my bear bag. Anything that had any remote, even my chapstick, like anything with any remote smell at all.
Mm-hmm. Anything with any sort of perfume of sorts. So that's the end of day three. Then, so you ended in a thunderstorm in the lean-to, maybe getting a
Yep.
little bit wet. You had the
Yep.
animal coming in the lean-to, but you made it to the spot that you were looking for. You finished the big 20-mile day, the first big 20-mile day. You went through the town. That seemed to be a good experience. You got to wash up halfway through.
Yep.
So you survived the night, clearly. The animal didn't take you. So day four, take us through it. Mileage, and then what was the goal?
All right. So day four was goal in mind was to get to Cary Lean to, and that is getting into the Moose River recreational area right off of just off of the River flow there. It's a lean to, Cary Lean to. So
Okay.
another big day, and especially through the West Canada Lake. So I'm walking and everything's really wet, and I'm getting soaked. And eventually I was just completely soaked from like the chest down. I was just like, and I was wearing rain gear. So I was like, this is a waste of my time. Like, why am I wearing rain gear? I'm hot. Like, I'm soaked anyway. So I just kept going. And, I was walking through puddles up to my like knees in some points. And I was like, this is crazy. And the bugs were insane. Like, they promptly wake up on the Northville-Placid Trail by 8:30. And they're just like pinging off of your head, the horseflies or deer flies, whatever you want to call them.
Probably
And
both.
yeah, and it was like dense humidity in there. Like it was just so tightly packed, and it just seemed to like sit in between the trees. It was just like breathing in a wet sponge, in my opinion. I had a hard time. And after having kind of like a poor night of sleep, I was just kind of emotionally distraught, kind of. And I was just getting blasted by bugs. And I had like a bug spray type of lotion that would work, but once you're like wet and sweaty, it's kind of useless. So the bugs were attacking anything they could. They would crawl into the bun that was on top of my head. They would crawl in trying to get to my scalp. So what I did is I tried to like smack the top of the bun, and I would just leave the bugs in there because if they're gonna attack me, they're gonna go on the ride with me. So
Oh
yeah,
man,
so
you are in full backpacking mode right
I
now.
was
That's for sure.
feral. It was just a crazy mountain woman at that time. And I was like, I definitely had my first breakdown. I started going up a hill, and I just kind of like braced myself, and I started crying. I was just like, I am so beat right now. And then I was like, all right, this is pretty too. Like gorgeous spruce trees. This was a blue down area too, and it was just gorgeous. It was like definitely not short of hard. It was very humid, and the bugs were crazy, and everything was wet. And I started walking into West Canada Creek, and I started hearing some kids. So I was pretty sure that there was some kind of like camp organization going on, or like they were camping or having like a, like a Boy Scout thing. And I could hear all this like laughter. So I was like, I'm getting closer to something like civilization or just a bunch of kids. I did actually end up passing them, but it wasn't for like a couple of miles. They're actually walking at a decent clip. And there's some really cool footbridges in there. And the water there as well is really pretty. There's some sand beaches. It almost looks like it was just taken off of a beach, like any like state park beach that you've ever been to that has like nice sand. It was like just so weird that there was these beautiful like pristine beaches and there were some lean-tos there. And like I almost kind of wish I had it in me to go farther, but it's like there's no way that I could have gone from Passaic to West Canada Creek after having hiked the other days before that. Just it was just beautiful.
So
And
you would recommend if someone else is planning their trip, staying at the West Canada Creek might be a good option for a lean-to as far as the scenery goes.
sure, I mean you're definitely pushing a great deal of mileage further, but it looks like 5, 6 miles more.
Hmm.
But if you got it in you, it's
Cool.
definitely worth checking
Good to
out.
know.
At least stopping for lunch. I would totally recommend stopping and just checking it out. There's so many blueberries. If you're going in August, prime time for blueberries. I mean, you're gonna just be picking as you go, and there were so many. Like I had a freezer bag just full of blueberries. It was like maybe a quarter full, so that was really nice. So many cool footbridges. It was very wet, and I just kept going around. And this is when I started seeing a lot of the blowdown. Was just getting out of the lean-to section of West Canada lakes, and it really wasn't bad. This is when I started seeing a lot of like the makeshift blue trail markers, like as if they maybe ran out of the MPT trail markers, or they were like, well, we're not really trying to make any for this section. I don't know. So I was just looking for any trail marker at that point, and I started seeing some blue, like plastic cheap looking trail markers, and it was relatively easy. The mud was obviously hard to get through, but it wasn't anything too bad. Just keep your like line of sight of trail markers like consistent, and I think that you won't have a problem. Kept going. I started getting stressed out again, and I was very wet, and I wasn't really having a good time. And I was like, I need to like really stop and take a break. So I stopped at Cedar Lakes Lean-to, and it's like a half-mile mark off of the actual trail. That's probably the farthest that I have gone off the trail yet. And I stopped there and I had lunch. That's when I had my tuna fish wrap and on a tortilla shell with some Cheetos mixed in for good measure.
Of
And I
course.
rang a, yeah, it was so good. And it immediately made me feel so much better. And I like wrung out my shoes and my socks and I let them dry. There's like this little dock out there and I let them dry there for a little while. It really didn't help that much. But I was trying to think of a way that I could hike with dry feet without wearing my shoes. And I was like, how am I do this? Well, I had my Crocs with me. So I took the insoles out of my trail runners and I put them in my Crocs. So I had more of a padding because if anyone has ever worn Crocs before, they're kind of like a rubber with like these little like dimple type of things on your feet. So you're going to feel that. You feel everything after a few days of walking consistently. You're going to feel every rock, every stone, anything. So I put those insoles in, and as I walked, my feet literally dried. I had dry socks, like my feet were dry,
Yeah,
which
you
was
were
really
airing
nice.
them out, which was
Yeah, I had
exactly
them
what it
tied on
needed.
the back of my pack, so they kind of aired out a bit. And then I kept walking. It was kind of like rolling marsh type of hills. Definitely a lot more blueberry picking, and it started to like kind of gain a little bit of elevation and started to get more into like a hardwood section, which was kind of a relief because I was like, I'm pretty tired of being in the swamp at this point. So this is right on the cusp of when I was starting to get to Carry Lean to, and it was getting late in my day. I think it was just after schedule, like maybe 4:30, almost pushing 5 o'clock. And I started hearing some people, and I was like, oh my God. And like, I'm beat. I'm like, I've had a rough day. And I see 12 college students from Colgate College at Carry Lean to.
Oh God.
Yeah. And like and I was like maybe this is the time that I just need to camp with people. I mean, they were college students. I didn't have any like feeling of threat or anything like that. But I saw them everywhere, and there's so many. There was probably like 8